Okay, so here's a really interesting question, and I think it's worth an experiment. All right, what happens if we take an array and a method and we put them together and we try to change things inside the array? We already know the basic idea. I said it's possible to change values in an array and have them reflected back in the caller, but I think it's worth doing an experiment. We'll put this in the methods and arrays directory. Okay, we're going to just grab some code here. And we're going to do just a real simple experiment here. And I want to just grab the code for the main as well. Okay. All right, now, here's the question. Let's say I create an array. I'm going to call it array. Just keep it nice and generic. Equals new int 10. We'll just say there's 10 elements there. All right, now what I'd like to do is I'd like to write a method that initializes the array. So I'm going to call this initialize array, and I'm going to pass it in the array that I want to initialize and a value that I want to have initialized as well. And I think I'm going to set up a variable here called value, and I'm going to set that equal to -1. Now, if I don't call initialize array, comma value, what are the values of all of the array elements in the array going to be? So we talked about this already, and the answer is that Java will set the value of each of these array elements to 0, zilch, nada, 0, okay? So what if you want to take control of that and you want to initialize all the elements in the array to something else? Well, we could write a method called initialize array, which does that. So let's write the code for initialize array. This method returns a void because it's doing something for us, but we don't need to return a value, because when we make changes to an array inside a method, they are reflected or they're visible to the caller. So if the main program created the array, passes the array in to initialize array changes values in the array, the main program is going to get to see that. All right, initialize array, we're going to pass in array as an argument, and we're also going to pass in a value as an argument. Okay, and this is a fairly straightforward method. The idea is every element in array is going to be set equal to value. Okay, so that means array sub 0 is going to be value, array sub 1 is going to be value, and so on and so forth. So for int I equals 0, we need to move through the array. How big is the array? Well, we know that because we can say array.length. That'll give us the value of the array. All right, so this code will move through the array elements, and if I say array sub I, sub I equals value, then every element in the array will get set equal to value by the time I'm done. So even though initially all the elements in the array down here, they're initially set to 0, now when I call initialize array, they're set to value. In this case, value is -1. So the thing that I want to illustrate here is that this behavior of initialize array, passing in an array, changing the value of elements in the array, and having that visible back in the main program, that is very different from passing other kinds of arguments into a method. So for example, here is value, right? That's being passed in, right? Value is -1. I'm passing value in here as an integer. Now, what would happen if I did this? Value equals 42, my favorite number. What would happen? Does value get changed in the main program? Well, that's what this experiment's all about. Let's see. So one thing I would like to do is I'd like to display the array. Okay, I'd like some code to display array. And we basically wrote that code just a moment ago over here. We had a method that was called display scores. So maybe what we can do here is grab the code for that. It's called eating your own dog food. We already wrote this, so why not use it? And instead of calling it display scores, we'll call it display array. And we'll make this array. And we'll make this array. And we'll make this array. Now, just to be clear, I don't have to call this argument here array, even though it's the same as this value here when I'm doing display array. I could call this splunge. I want to make a point here. The name here of the array doesn't matter when it's being passed in as an argument. All that matters is that we're passing an array of integers, and then Java will happily display that array of integers. So even though I'm saying array here, this name doesn't have to match this. Java doesn't care. What Java cares is that you're passing in an integer array, whatever its name is, and it will happily display the content. Same thing here with this thing value. We could change that to something else if we wanted to, give it a different name. Okay, let's get back to what I was trying to do here. So I'm gonna do a system out print line here. Oh yeah, okay, let's do it here. We'll say system out.println array contents. All right, and then after that, let's do a system.out.println of value. In fact, why don't we do this right here? We'll do a system out println here as well. Okay, so I just want to illustrate a point. And so the question that we're wrestling with here is, or that observation that we're wrestling with here is, if I pass an array into a method, like in here, initialize array, if I pass this array into this method, initialize array, and I make changes to the array values, do I get to see those changes back in the main program? And the answer is yes. And we're going to prove that because we're going to initialize array to all negative ones, and then we're going to call display array. We better see all negative ones if that's true. But then a second question is, if I pass in value, this value -1, if I pass this variable value in to initialize array, and I change its value to 42, what's going to happen on line 15? Am I going to see 42 or am I going to see -1? And then what's going to happen here on 35? Am I going to see main value is 42 or main value is -1? All right, so let's run it, and well, maybe you have an idea. So remember, what's this value going to be? And then what's this value going to be? And do we get -1s? That's the question. So let's compile and run this. I think it's not going to work initially because I got to get into the arrays directory. And we got a little syntax error to correct there. It's always on the system out print lines to get into trouble. Oh, got to name it. Methods and arrays experiment. Experiment. Okay, so let's take a look. So first observation here, initialize the array contents. Those are all -1. That's what I wanted. And second observation is inside initialize array, when I changed the value to 42, it was 42. But when I return from the main into the main program, value was -1. So let's just talk about why that is so that you're very clear on the difference between passing arrays into a method and passing integers and doubles and stuff like that. Okay, so here, when initialize array gets called, if we pass an array into a method, we can make changes to the array. If we pass a value into the method, what happens, or pass an integer or a double or something like that, what happens is the value that's here in value gets copied to this argument here. All right, it's a little confusing because I'm calling it value, but look, I can do this, -1. That's totally legal. So the value here, -1, gets copied to this value. Any changes that get made to this parameter value inside initialize array stays inside initialize array. Nobody finds out about those changes. And the reason is that initialize array is saying I am accepting an integer. The integer could be a variable that's an integer, or it could just be a hard-coded integer. So imagine if you did allow this to make changes to value, changed inside initialize array, changed the value outside the array. That would be crazy because that would mean when you pass -1 in as the value, and now we're basically saying -1 is equal to 42. That's crazy. You can't do that. You can't reset the value of -1 to be the value of 42. All right. There's more nuance to the difference between something like this, which is the name of an array reference, and something like this, which is a simple type like an integer or a double. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But for right now, let's just say as a rule, you pass in an array name. This is really an array name. You pass in an array, and you can make changes to the array. You pass in a type like an integer or double or a Boolean or character, you're getting a copy of that value from the caller. And you can make changes to that copy, but it's not visible to the caller. Okay,